Today we're going to talk about stray lighting and how a matte box or sunshade can help preclude that problem from happening on set, causing things like lens flare. So we're going to talk about the difference between a matte box and a sunshade, different filter sizes, and how do I select a matte box or sunshade for my camera. Now we're going to talk a little about selecting a matte box or sunshade for your camera, and the things you have to take into consideration are how large is my imager. Imagers today in 3-imager cameras start at 1/4, 1/3, 1/2, and 2/3 typically. Large single imager cameras can be micro 4/3, 35, 35 Academy, Super 35, and the 35 still imager. So there's a lot of things to consider. You'll find on the Chrosziel site there is a chart that will help you in this selection, showing you how wide of a lens it'll cover, depending on how many matte box stages or how many filter stages that you require for your shoot. The more filter stages, the less wide of a lens any matte box or sunshade will cover. So do keep that in mind as you're making your selection. Now let's talk about the sunshade in particular and how it helps with stray light. Now as we're looking at a sunshade, you can see the cavity here protects the front element of the lens from any light coming in from the side or the top. The addition of a top flag, some people call it a French flag, will also help, especially with an overhead light or very sunny day. With the addition of side flags or bottom flag, you can also control light kick off of a sidewalk or shiny object, and side lights as you're lighting your talent or product. So keep that in mind as you're setting up your shot and watching for things like lens flare. Lens flare is usually caused by light hitting the lens directly in the front of the element and causing a highlight that's often hard to impossible to remove from the finished product. Let's talk about the sunshade in particular. The sunshade is usually referred to as a product that clamps onto a camera. A matte box, on the other hand, usually is rod mounted. There's advantages and disadvantages to both. So let's start with the sunshade and the advantages of it. Sunshades are generally very lightweight. They clamp directly onto the camera. It's great for the run and gun cinematographer because it keeps the weight of the entire package down, it keeps the profile down, and as you're packing your gear for travel, you have fewer things to pack and transport. Sunshades adapt quickly and easily, usually just sliding onto the front of a camera lens. In some cameras, you will need a lens adapter because you do not have the opportunity to clamp directly onto the lens barrel itself. The lens could be a rotating lens. There may not be enough landing on the front barrel of the lens. The lens could move in and out. So all these things must be taken into consideration as you're making your selection. Now, most lenses today have a thread on the inside of the lens. You have to know how large is the lens so you know what size adapter or screw-in ring that you need, whether it's 58, 72, 77, 82, etc. For example, an 85 millimeter outside barrel diameter will generally yield a 82 millimeter thread on the inside of the lens. In this case, this is a 72 millimeter on this Canon DSLR lens, and this adapter ring has threads that will screw into the front, and provide a landing for the matte box to secure onto the ring. This creates a secured sunshade onto the camera, so you don't have to worry about it falling off or ripping out threads. So let's just show how this works. This will just simply screw into the front of the lens. Make sure this is snug, but don't over tighten it. You don't want to strip out the threads or damage the equipment. And now, with the proper size sunshade, you'll find that many sunshades, the back diameter will be 104, 110, or 130. So you'll need to know what size you have in order to select the proper retaining ring. Now you can see this retaining ring has a slot in it, and that allows compression as you're tightening up the sunshade onto the adapter ring. So let's install it into the sunshade by simply popping it in like this. You'll see on the bottom there is a screw to tighten or clamp the sunshade onto the camera. So let's go ahead and do that. Just slides right on. And there you have it. It's very simple. Now, in talking about what sunshades and matte boxes do, we talked about controlling the light. Part of the magic of using a sunshade or matte box is your ability to use filters. Filters are very important. They come in many sizes, 3x3, 4x4, 4x565, also known as a P size or Panavision size, 5x5, 5.65 by 5.65, and 6.6 by 6.6. So it's important to know how big is your lens that you need to cover when selecting a matte box or sunshade. For most DSLR applications, a 4x4 is adequate. 4x4 will cover a lens up to about 120 millimeters. 3x3 will cover a lens up to about 77 millimeters. And that concludes our section on the advantages of using a sunshade. Now we're going to talk about the advantages of a rod-mounted matte box, and particularly let's start with the lightweight support base. You'll often see this referred to as LWS, which means lightweight support. Well, what does that mean? Well, you have two 15 millimeter rods in diameter, and they're on 60 millimeter spacing. They're attached to a base that's specific to your camera or use. You'll find an easy guide on the Chrosziel site or the Schneider Optics site that will guide you in selecting the proper base for your camera, be it a DSLR or a prosumer type camera. So check there at schneideroptics.com or chrosziel.de. Now, we've attached the Canon 7D to the proper lightweight base so that we can use attachments such as a follow focus. The follow focus does exactly what the name implies. It allows you to adjust the focus on the camera in a controlled manner. So let's talk a little about that. As you're building your package, you generally start with the camera mounted to the base. If you're going to use a follow focus, then you're going to need a gear on the camera lens in order to use the follow focus. And we offer many products that do that, including the new Flexi gear from Chrosziel. This will work on lens from 60 to 120 millimeters. Let's first talk about the matte box itself. As we spoke earlier, the matte box is rod mounted. You can see this has a center bracket, and this has two 15 millimeter receivers, and it easily tightens onto the rod just by turning this knob. Now, we recently covered stray light and how you can avoid that. Well, a matte box will certainly work in the same manner as a sunshade to do that. One of the important elements, of course, is to close the gap between the back or rear inside diameter of the matte box compared to the outside diameter of the lens. You can do that in a number of ways with hard matting rings. that have to be specific to that particular lens diameter. Where Chrosziel now offers the new Flexi Ring. As the name implies, it's flexible, it's rubber, and this particular ring will work on lenses that are 75 to 100 millimeters in diameter. Let's just see how this works onto the lens. Now you can see as I'm sliding it onto the lens, it's closing the gap around the lens. This easily inserts into the matte box. This has a thread in the back. This simply screws in. And now we're going to slide the matte box onto the lightweight support rods. This is Chrosziel's new MB450-R20 matte box. It has a 4x4 filter holder in the rear and a pea-size 4x565 filter holder in the front. These will just slide right in. Now the thing you want to be aware of when you're mounting a matte box onto any camera is that your filter will clear the front element of the lens. This is especially important if you have a wide-angle lens that has the front element sticking beyond the front of the lens barrel. You want to be careful not to scratch your lens. So we've selected the depth of the matte box here. So the filter tray will just slide right in, like so. So what are the other advantages of using a rod-mounted matte box as opposed to a clamp-on sunshade? Well, there's many accessories available from Chrosziel that will be a great advantage to you when you're out in the field shooting. One of these products is the follow focus. This is the 20601S. This is the DV version of their follow focus line. You can see as we loosen up this knob, you can see the action that takes place here that will allow us to engage or disengage the follow focus into the lens. Okay, so the follow focus will easily mount onto the lightweight support rod. So let's go ahead and show how that works. Just like the matte box, the follow focus will slide onto the front rods like this. Now, in order for a follow focus to work with any lens, the lens has to have a gear. If your lens does not have a gear, there are a number of gear solutions available from Chrosziel. We have lenses that are made specifically for different diameter lens. We also have our Flexi gear that will simply attach onto the lens, and then you turn this knob to tighten it up. Once you have your flexible gear ring installed, you have the option to trim the gear, or you can just take it and tape it down so that you can use it on a larger diameter gear at a later date. Now let's go ahead and install the matte box. As you saw before, this will just slide right onto our 15 millimeter rods. An important note about the 15 millimeter rods is that you do not want them to stick beyond the front of the center bracket, or otherwise your rotating filter tray would run into the rods. So be careful as you're selecting your depth of your matte box onto the rods. So this is our package now. We have the matte box with a follow focus and our Flexi gear. Now we're ready to go make movies. Now, in selecting a matte box, one of the very important things to consider is how wide is my lens. The wider the lens, in order to prevent vignetting, vignetting is clipping on the edges as you're rotating your filter or being able to see the edge of the matte box in the frame. So with a matte box like the 450R20, you have a 4x4 in the rear and a pea-size or 4x5/6.5 in the front. You can see the difference in size. Now this is a combination tray. It is 4x4 or 4x5/6.5, so you can use both filters. However, when using a wide-angle lens, you want to be able to use a 4x5/6.5 filter into this filter frame, because the wide angle of the lens, if you think about the action of the lens, the view is going to be going like this. So that's why you wouldn't want to have two 4x4s, because the edge of the frame would come into the shot. Now, if you don't have 4x5/6.5 filters in your Schneider filter set, and you only have 4x4s, a way to compensate for that is just to pull the camera back and then tighten in on the shot, and that will preclude the 4x4 from vignetting in the frontmost filter tray. Keep in mind, this is a combo tray, so you can use your 4x4 here in the front as well.
For more information, please visit our website at www.digitalcinemacourse.com.
I'm Ron Ayers with Schneider Optics in Los Angeles, California. Thank you for watching Digital Cinema Course.